I sat on that velvet sofa for 3 hours, clutching a purse that contained nothing but declined credit cards. My son had promised to return in 10 minutes, but he was gone, along with my life savings. Just as the manager stepped forward to escort me out, the young receptionist stared at my driver's license. She looked up, her eyes wide, and asked if I was the daughter of Margaret Harrow. My name is Judith Merrick. I am 56 years old, a widow, and for the last 3 decades, I have lived in a quiet, dusty corner of Oklahoma that most maps seem to forget. By day, I sit in a windowless office at Midline Freight Solutions, a trucking company where the carpet is the color of old tea and the air always smells faintly of diesel and stale donuts. I am their accountant. My life is a series of numbers that belong to other people, ensuring their profits are high, while I drive a sedan that has nearly 200,000 miles on the odometer. My mornings are a ritual of economy. I brew my coffee with exactly 1 scoop of grounds, adding extra water to stretch the tin for another week. I sit at my small kitchen table, the one Frank built before the accident, and watch the sun come up over a lawn that I mow myself to save $40 a month. My house is small. The paint is peeling slightly on the south side, and the gutters rattle when the wind blows from the plains. It is not much, but it was mine. I have spent my entire existence making myself smaller so there would be enough room for everyone else. I lived large for my employer and lived small for myself. That was fine by me because I was saving all the space for Ethan. Ethan Merrick is my only son. He is 29 years old and has always been too big for this town, even when he was a boy. He looked at our street with a mixture of boredom and disdain. "Mum, I can't stay here," he would say, pacing around the living room like a caged tiger. "This place, it suffocates me." I understood his hunger, even if it frightened me. When Frank died on that construction site, leaving me with a 10-year-old boy and a payout that barely covered the funeral, I made a vow. I worked my shift at Midline Freight and then waited tables at a diner until 2 in the morning. My ankles swelled and my back screamed. But every tip went into a jar for Ethan. I wanted him to have the keys to the world that had been locked to me. When he graduated with a degree in business administration and moved to Florida to work for a massive conglomerate called Horizon Crest Hospitality, I felt like I could finally exhale. The name alone sounded like a promise. Horizon Crest. It sounded like gold. His phone calls were a whirlwind of jargon I could barely follow. He spoke of scalability, vertical integration, and disrupting the market. "We are building an app. It's going to change how people book luxury travel. Mum," he would tell me, his voice cracking with excitement. I need capital to show the board I'm serious." I nodded along on the other end of the line, just happy to hear his voice. But then the requests changed. He did not just want my emotional support anymore. He wanted leverage. He told me about a startup connected to Horizon Crest that required a buy-in for the founding members. He asked me to mortgage the house. He asked me to liquidate the retirement fund Frank had started and the savings I had scraped together from 20 years of serving burnt coffee to truckers. It's just for the bridge financing," Ethan had insisted, his voice desperate and charming all at once. "Mum, please, do you want to count trucks in Oklahoma until you die? This is my shot. Our shot." I sat up for 3 nights staring at the ceiling. Every instinct in my gut told me to keep my money safe. I had lived over half my life in fear and hesitation, terrified of being poor again. But then I thought of Ethan's face. I thought of how much I loved him. I told myself that perhaps my purpose was just to be the fuel for his rocket. So I signed. I signed my name, Judith Merrick, on the bottom of a stack of documents that made my stomach turn. I wired the money. All of it. 2 weeks later, Ethan called. He sounded euphoric. "Pack your bags, Mom," he said. "I am flying you to Miami. We are meeting the investors at the Azure Crown. You need to see what you helped build." I put on my best Sunday dress, the one I had worn to my sister's wedding 5 years ago, and boarded a plane. I told myself I was flying toward a new future. I did not know I was flying toward a cliff. The lobby of the Azure Crown was an assault on my senses. Everywhere I looked, I saw polished marble that gleamed like ice and crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The air smelled of expensive white tea and something floral that I could not name but knew I could not afford. I sat on the edge of a velvet armchair that was likely worth more than my car, and I tucked my feet underneath me. My beige pumps were 3 years old, and the leather near the toe was starting to peel. I tried to cover the scuff mark with my other foot, feeling small and grey in a world painted in gold. Then Ethan appeared through the revolving doors. He looked like a stranger. He was wearing a navy suit that fit him perfectly, the kind of fabric that did not wrinkle, and his hair was styled back with gel. He smelled of sandalwood and crisp money. He pulled me into a hug, but his body was rigid. His eyes were not on me. He was scanning the lobby, checking his watch, and glancing at the phone clutched in his hand. He was vibrating with an energy that felt like excitement. Or perhaps panic. "Mum, you made it?" he said, pulling back to look at me, though his gaze flickered to the elevator bank. "This is it. The anonymous investor is flying in tonight. Once we close this deal..." "Mom, you are never going to have to touch another calculator. We are going to be set for life. It's all happening so fast." "Ethan," I said, my voice sounding thin in the cavernous space. "Are you sure about this?" "Of course I'm sure. Come on. Let's get you checked in," he said. He steered me toward the reception desk like I was a piece of luggage. "Give me your ID and your cards. I booked the presidential suite. I will handle the deposit and get you settled. Then I'll take you to dinner with the partners." I hesitated. My hand trembled as I reached into my purse. I handed over my driver's license and the debit card linked to the account where I had transferred every cent I owned. The receptionist was a young woman with a name tag that read Ava Collins. She took the cards with a practiced smile that faltered the moment she looked at my license. Her fingers paused over her keyboard. She looked at the name, Judith Harrow Merrick, and then looked up at me with a strange intensity. She swiped the card. A soft beep indicated an error. She swiped it again. "I am sorry, sir," Ava said softly. "The card is being declined." Ethan let out a sharp, forced laugh. "It's that damn credit union in Oklahoma. They probably flagged the travel as fraud. Small-town banks." "Right." He turned to me, his smile tight and unconvincing. "Mum, just sit over there for a second. I am going to run up to the executive floor and find the Horizon Crest liaison. We will override this in 5 minutes." Just then, his phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his face went the color of ash. I have to take this," he stammered. He leaned in and kissed my cheek, his lips cold and dry. "It's them. I'll step outside to take this call and be right back. Mum, just stay here. Don't worry." He turned and sprinted toward the exit, the glass doors spinning wildly in his wake. I sat back down on the velvet chair. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. I watched the golden hands of the grand clock tick forward. I called Ethan, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text. No delivery receipt. A cold, heavy stone formed in the pit of my stomach. I told myself he was just busy. I told myself he was fixing it. A man in a dark suit approached me. He was not Ethan. "Mrs. Merrick?" he asked. His voice was low and grave. "I am the front office manager. I am afraid we have a problem. The wire transfer for the suite has not arrived. Furthermore, the account associated with this card has been frozen by the bank due to suspicious depletion. We cannot check you in." The room began to spin. Suspicious depletion. That meant 0. I sat there, unable to breathe, clutching my purse as the guests around me blurred into shapes of light and colour. I was 56 years old, and I was entirely empty. The young receptionist, Ava, stepped out from behind the counter. She ignored the manager and walked straight to me. She was holding my license, staring at my face as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. She leaned in, her voice trembling slightly. "Ba, ku fai la con gai qua, Margaret Harrow Kong?" she asked. The question hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I recoiled, pulling my purse tighter against my stomach as if to shield myself from the name she had just spoken. "Margaret Harrow." "No," I said, my voice too loud in the quiet lobby. "My mother was... she was just a housewife. You are mistaken." But my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. The denial was a reflex, a habit ingrained in me since I was a little girl. A flash of memory seared through my panic. I saw my mother standing in our hallway, not in an apron, but in a sharp grey suit that smelled of lavender and ambition. I saw her packing a suitcase. I saw the day she vanished when I was 10 years old. I heard my father's voice, thick with whiskey and bitterness, warning me later that night. "Do not ever say that name again. We do not use the name Harrow in this house. She is dead to us." Ava did not back down. She leaned over the counter, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "I grew up in this hotel," she said, her eyes searching mine. "My grandfather. He was a concierge for a woman named Margaret Harrow. She co-founded this chain before they changed the name to Horizon Crest Hospitality. He kept a picture of her. You have her eyes." I felt dizzy. I had come here to watch my son conquer the world. Instead, I was standing in the ruins of my own life while a stranger dug up a grave I thought was cemented over. "Mrs. Merrick," the manager interrupted, his tone devoid of sympathy. "We need a valid method of payment immediately. The room rate is $800 a night, plus the security deposit. If you cannot pay, I must ask you to leave the premises." I looked around. People were staring. A couple in expensive tennis whites whispered behind their hands. The humiliation was a hot, crawling sensation that moved up my neck and burned my cheeks. I was 56 years old. I had worked every day of my life. And now I was being looked at like a vagrant. I just need a moment," I whispered. Ava stepped out from behind the desk. She ignored her manager's glare and took my elbow. "Come with me," she said quietly. "Use the staff restroom, just for a few hours, until you figure out where you're going." It was an act of kindness, but it felt like a slap. I was being offered charity in the very place my son had promised me I would reign as a queen. I let her lead me away. Head bowed, past the golden elevators and into a narrow, beige hallway that smelled of cleaning chemicals. Inside the small break room, I sat on a plastic chair and dialed the bank again. This time, I demanded to speak to the fraud department. "I am looking at the transaction log. Ma'am," the agent said, his voice tinny through the speaker. "The transfer was authorized 2 days ago. The funds were moved to an account under E&T Holdings. That is a corporate entity." "I did not authorize that," I said, my voice cracking. "Who owns E&T Holdings?" "The signatories are Ethan Merrick and a Trent Calloway," the agent replied. "And Mrs. Merrick. There is a memo attached to the wire transfer. It is marked as Mother's Stake Seed Funding. It is listed as a non-refundable capital contribution." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the linoleum floor. Seed funding. He had not just stolen from me. He had itemized me. He had turned his mother's life savings, the sweat from my double shifts, the money from selling my husband's house, into a line item on a spreadsheet. I retrieved my phone and opened my email. There it was in the trash folder. A forwarded receipt I had missed. Mother's stake seed funding. I made a sound that did not sound human. It was a jagged, ugly sob that tore out of my throat. I curled into a ball on that hard plastic chair and cried. I cried for the house I would never get back. I cried for the retirement I had lost. But mostly, I cried because the boy I had carried, the boy I had taught to tie his shoes, the boy I had worshipped, had looked at me and seen nothing but a wallet to be emptied and discarded. I cried until my chest ached and my eyes felt like they were filled with sand. The room was silent except for the hum of a vending machine. Slowly, I stood up. I walked to the small sink in the corner and splashed cold water on my face. I looked into the mirror. The woman staring back was old. Her skin was grey, her eyes were swollen, and her hair was a mess. She looked defeated. She looked like a victim. I gripped the edges of the sink until my knuckles turned white. "No," I whispered to the reflection. "No one is allowed to end my life for me." My son thought I was just a resource to be used up. He thought I was done. He was wrong. Ava returned a few minutes later, holding a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee and a file folder that smelled of dust and mildew. She looked over her shoulder before sliding into the plastic chair opposite me, her demeanor shifting from professional receptionist to conspirator. The coffee tasted like burnt rubber. But I drank it anyway, because the warmth gave me something to focus on other than the hollowness in my chest. "My grandfather worked here for 40 years, Ava said, pushing the folder across the scratched table toward me. "He started as a bellboy and ended as the head concierge. He used to tell me bedtime stories about the woman who built this place. He called her the ghost of the azure crown." I stared at the folder, my hand hovering over the cover. "I am not in the mood for ghost stories. Ava, I am a 56-year-old woman with $11 in her purse and a son who just sold me out for God knows what. It is not a ghost story," Ava insisted, her voice dropping to a hush. Before it was Horizon Crest, this chain was called Harrow and Linden Resorts. It was founded by Victor Linden and Margaret Harrow. They were partners. I felt a prickle of cold sweat on my neck. Harrow, the name my father had forbidden. Ava opened the file. Inside were photocopies of old newspaper clippings and grainy documents. "Legend has it that one night, Margaret just vanished. Poof. Gone. Victor Linden rebranded everything the next week. He acted like she never existed. But the old staff, they whispered. They said there was a secret letter. They said there was a daughter. This is ridiculous, I said, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. You are reading too much into corporate gossip. Look at the signature. Judith? Ava said, tapping a finger on a scanned document titled Articles of Incorporation. I looked down. The document was dated 30 years ago. At the bottom, next to a sprawling, aggressive signature from Victor Linden, was a neat, elegant autograph. Margaret Harrow. The air left my lungs. I knew that I knew the way the tail of the Y looped back on itself like a protective arm. It was the same handwriting that used to be on the yellow sticky notes on our refrigerator when I was a child. Meatloaf in the oven, be back by 6. Love you. Judy. It's her, I whispered. The denial died in my throat. I knew it, Ava said, her eyes wet. I helped you because, well, my grandfather died in a service elevator accident 10 years ago. Horizon Crest fought the compensation claim. They said it was user error. They cut my grandmother's pension in half. My grandfather always said that Mrs. Harrow would never have let that happen. He said she cared about the people who made the beds and parked the cars. I sat back, the plastic chair creaking under my weight. Memories I had suppressed for decades began to flood back, sharp and stinging. I remembered my mother's suits, so different from the aprons the other mothers wore. I remembered the hushed phone calls in the kitchen late at night. I remembered the trips she took to Florida for consulting, trips she never fully explained. And I remembered my father. After she left, he had turned into a man made of silence and brick dust. Whenever I asked where she went, he would pour another glass of cheap whiskey and shout until the windows rattled. Money makes people disappear. Judith? He would scream. Do not ask about her. She chose the gold over us. Never use the name Harrow. It is a cursed name. I looked at the young woman sitting across from me. So you think, what, that I am some kind of secret princess? I think, Ava said, leaning in, that if you are her legitimate daughter, then you might be the heir to the shares she never sold. Victor Linden buried her name, but he could not bury the law. If she did not sign them away, then a part of this hotel, a part of this empire, might belong to you. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, but it sounded like a cough. It was the absurdity of it all. Ava, look at me. My shoes are falling apart. I just lost my house. I cannot even afford to pay for the room my son booked, and you are telling me I own the place. I am telling you that you might, Ava said firmly. I looked down at the signature again. My mother had built this. She had walked these halls. And now, her grandson was using her name to scam her daughter in the very building she founded. The irony was bitter, but underneath the bitterness, something else began to ignite. It was a small, hot coal of rage. My shift ends in 20 minutes, Ava whispered, checking her watch. You cannot stay in the lobby, and you have no money for a cab. Stay here. Sleep in the staff lounge tonight. No one checks it after midnight. Tomorrow, if you are willing, we can go up to the old archives on the mechanical floor. We can look for proof. I looked at the mirror on the wall. I saw a tired, broken woman. But for the first time in 40 years, I looked at her and saw Margaret Harrow's daughter. Okay, I said, my voice steadying. Let's go hunting. I woke up on a sofa that felt like it was stuffed with concrete and regret. My back seized up the moment I tried to sit up, and for a few seconds, I forgot where I was. I looked around the break room, at the vending machine humming in the corner and the half-empty pot of coffee, and the reality crashed down on me. I was 56 years old. I had worked since I was 16. And here I was, waking up like a vagrant in the staff quarters of a hotel that, if Ava was right, was built on the bones of my own family history. "Mrs. Merrick," Ava whispered, pushing open the door. She was holding a ring of keys that looked heavy enough to anchor a boat. "The shift change is in 10 minutes. We have to go now." We took the service elevator up to the 14th floor, but we did not get off at the guest suites. We climbed a narrow metal staircase to a level that was not listed on the guest panel. The air up here was stale and hot, smelling of heated copper and old dust. This was the mechanical floor, the guts of the building where the ventilation systems roared like trapped beasts. "This used to be the administrative level for Harrow and Linden," Ava explained, using the flashlight on her phone to cut through the gloom. "When Horizon Crest built the new tower, they just walled this part off. It became storage for everything they did not want to look at." We moved past rows of rusted filing cabinets and cardboard boxes that were sagging with age. I felt ridiculous. I was a grandmother who clipped coupons for laundry detergent. And now I was creeping around a dark attic like a character in a bad detective novel. "Hey, who is back there?" A voice boomed from the other end of the corridor. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. Ava shoved me behind a stack of air filters and stepped out, her voice pitching up into a cheerful, innocent chirp. "Just me. Jerry Housekeeping needed some extra filters for the AC units on 12. The supply closet was empty. Make it quick." "Ava?" The guard grunted, his footsteps retreating. "You know nobody likes coming up here." I waited until the door clanged shut before I exhaled. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. It was adrenaline. We found the section marked pre-merger. It was a graveyard of paper. I started digging through a box labelled V.L. M.H. Correspondence, 1993. My fingers turned grey with dust. I pulled out a manila envelope that had been ripped open. Inside was a photocopy of a document titled Last Will and Testament. It was unsigned, but the text was clear. "I, Margaret Harrow, being of sound mind, hereby intend to bequeath my entire 50% stake in Harrow and Linden Resorts to my minor daughter, Judith Harrow, should any untimely event occur." "She didn't abandon me?" I whispered. I dug deeper. Under the will was a sheet of hotel stationery, covered in the frantic, looping handwriting I remembered from my childhood. It was a draft of a letter that was never sent. Victor has the lawyers everywhere. He says if I do not sell at the valuation he set, he will drag us through court. He says he will prove I am unfit. He says he will take custody of Judith, and I will never see her again. I cannot risk losing her. If my daughter ever grows up and reads this, the sentence ended there. A smear of ink trailed off the page, as if she had been interrupted. I touched the paper. A hot, hard lump formed in my throat. I had spent 40 years hating her for leaving. I had spent 40 years resenting my father for his silence. But they had both been pawns. My father had been paid off or threatened into silence, and my mother had been erased. "Judith, look at this," Ava said. She held up a black and white photograph. It showed a young, fierce-looking woman standing next to an architectural model of this very hotel. Her hand was resting possessively on the roof, standing behind her, looking at her with cold, predatory eyes, was a man in a sharp suit. "That is Victor Linden," Ava said, pointing to the man. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. "And look at this. Victor Linden is currently the honorary chairman of Horizon Crest. He is retiring next month. He is handing the CEO position to this man." She turned the screen toward me. I saw a photo of a slick, middle-aged man with a smile that looked like it cost more than my house. Trent Calloway. I read the name out loud. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Trent Calloway. That was the name on the bank account. The co-signer of the shell company where Ethan had sent my money. "Ethan is not just stealing from me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "He is working for them. They needed the money to come from a clean source. Or maybe they needed the money to come from me." "Why you?" Ava asked. "Because if I am an investor, even a small one, it legitimizes something," I said, my mind racing faster than it ever had in the accounting office. Or maybe I am just the patsy, the daughter of the founder, returning to invest, only to lose everything. It covers their tracks. It washes the money. I looked at the photo of my mother one last time. She looked strong. She looked like she wouldn't have let a 29-year-old boy and a corporate shark take her dignity without a fight. I stood up, wiping the dust from my skirt. "Ava," I said, "if they used my name to launder money, then it is time I use that name to take back everything." Ava introduced me to a lawyer named Marcus Holloway. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a suit that had seen better days, the kind of attorney who usually handled fence disputes and tenant evictions. We met in the corner of a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the hotel because I could not afford his office consultation fee, and he agreed to work for a percentage of the recovery if the case had merit. At first, he looked at me with polite skepticism. "Mrs. Merrick, family disputes over money are messy. Usually, the money is just gone." But when I slid the photocopy of the founding articles and my mother's unfinished letter across the greasy table, his demeanor shifted. He put on a pair of reading glasses and leaned in, his finger tracing the lines of the text. He stayed silent for 5 minutes. "This changes the texture of the case," Marcus said, his voice low. "If these are authentic, Horizon Crest didn't just buy her out. They erased her. There is no record of a payout. If we can prove you are her biological daughter, you have standing to claim that her shares were never legally transferred. But we need biological proof. Papers can be forged. Blood cannot." Ava reached into her bag and pulled out a small, sealed plastic bag containing a silver hairbrush she had found in the personal effects box in the archives. "There are strands of hair in this," she said. "It was in the box labelled Margaret Harrow. We will run a DNA test against yours," Marcus said. "It will take time, but if it is a match, we can file an injunction to freeze assets pending an investigation into the chain of title." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of hope and nausea. While Marcus drafted the paperwork, I stepped outside to call Ethan. He answered on the second ring. "Mom." His voice sounded thin and high, like a wire pulled until it snaps. "Mom." "Where are you? The hotel said you never checked in. You know exactly where I am?" "Ethan," I said into the receiver, "I am in the street, with nothing, because you gave my life to a shell company." No, it is not like that," he stammered. "I just did what Trent told me to do." We had to move the liquidity to E&T Holdings to clear the audit before the merger. It is temporary. Mom, you have to trust me one more time. If you make a scene, you ruin everything. Trust you. I laughed, but it was a dry, jagged sound. Ethan, I want you to forward me every email, every contract, and every text message you have exchanged with Trent Calloway, right now. I can't. I signed an NDA, he whispered. Mom, they will destroy me. And what do you think you did to me? I asked. The line went dead. He had hung up on me. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Back in the staff break room, Ava hacked into the employee Wi-Fi and handed me an old tablet with a cracked screen. I need you to look at this, she said. I managed to find the pitch deck Ethan sent to the investors. It was on an unsecured server. I squinted at the screen. My fingers felt clumsy and thick as I tried to navigate the touch interface. I kept tapping the wrong thing, making windows pop up and close. Damn this infernal machine, I muttered, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. Here, Ava said gently, guiding my hand. Look at slide 4. I read the text. Under a section titled Source of Funds, it listed Legacy Capital Contribution Direct Lineage of founder Margaret Harrow. I felt the blood drain from my face. Ethan had not just stolen my money. He had used my identity. He had sold me to these sharks as the daughter of the founder to give their dirty deal a veneer of legitimacy. I was their prop. They used my name to make their fraud look like heritage, I said, my voice shaking with fury. I called Marcus immediately. File it, I said. File the petition for elder financial abuse and send a notice to Horizon Crest. 2 hours later, Marcus forwarded me the response from the Horizon Crest legal department. It was a single paragraph, cold and dismissive. We have no record of any founder named Margaret Harrow. Any allegations regarding historical ownership are baseless and defamatory. If Mrs. Merrick continues to spread these falsehoods, we will pursue legal action for damages to our corporate reputation. They were threatening me. They were daring me to fight. I looked at the email. Then I looked up at the ceiling of the break room, imagining the penthouse suite 500 feet above me where Trent Calloway was probably drinking scotch. They think I want a refund, I told Ava. They think I am just a sad old woman who wants her pension back. I stood up and smoothed my wrinkled skirt. I do not want the money anymore, I said. I want the hotel. The lab results arrived in a sealed envelope that looked far too ordinary to contain the secret of my existence. Marcus opened it with a letter opener, scanned the page, and looked up at me with a rare smile. 99.9%, he said. You are Margaret Harrow's daughter. Judith, the science is irrefutable. With that piece of paper, the dynamic shifted. Marcus marched into the county courthouse and presented the DNA evidence along with the unsigned will and the original articles of incorporation. We drew a judge named Vance, a man with a face like carved granite who seemed to despise corporate lawyers. When Horizon Crest's attorneys tried to argue that the request was a fishing expedition, Judge Vance cut them off. He signed the order requiring the preservation of all records dating back to the merger. From now on, Marcus told me as we walked down the courthouse steps, what they buried does not belong to them alone. By the afternoon, a courier delivered a heavy cream envelope to the hotel front desk addressed to me. It was an invitation to a private settlement conference to be held the following morning in the Diamond Conference Room at the Azure Crown. It is a trap, I said, reading the polite legal threats veiled as hospitality. They want to buy me off in a room where no one can hear them. Then we make sure the room is not as private as they think. Ava said. She was tapping furiously on her phone. I have reached out to the old guard, the head of housekeeping from the 90s, the former sous chef, the people Victor Linden pushed out. They are coming. That evening, as we were strategizing in the staff break room, the door creaked open. It was Ethan. My son looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his eyes were sunken into dark hollows. He stood there for a moment, looking at me, and then he collapsed to his knees on the dirty linoleum. Mum, I am so sorry. He sobbed, his voice breaking. I just wanted to fix it. Trent said if I moved the money, it would clear the audit, and then I could pay you back with interest. Please. You have to believe me. I sat on the plastic chair, looking down at him. A week ago, I would have rushed to hold him. I would have told him everything was going to be okay. But the woman who would have done that was gone. Stand up, I said. My voice was calm and cold. Ethan looked up, startled by the tone. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. This time, do you want to save yourself, or save the person who let them use you as a tool? I asked him. Are you my son, or are you their puppet? Ethan flinched. He looked at the floor, breathing hard. They had a party on the roof last night, he whispered. Trent was drunk. He told the investors that stupid mothers are the cheapest source of capital. He laughed about it. He is planning to move the funds to an offshore account in the Caymans by Friday. Once it is there, it is gone. The words hit me like physical blows, but I did not bleed. Instead, I felt a layer of ice form over my heart, protecting it. Marcus, I said, not taking my eyes off my son. Draft a cooperation agreement. Ethan turns over everything, the emails, the recordings, the bank transfers. In exchange, we represent him and argue for leniency with the district attorney. Mom, Ethan asked, his voice trembling. You are turning me in? I am saving you from prison, Ethan, I said. This is not forgiveness. This is the only way out of the hole you dug. You are going to help us take them down. We spent the rest of the night building our case. We aligned the timeline of the transfers with the documents from the archives. We prepared the testimony of the old staff. We turned the meeting from a negotiation into an ambush. As Marcus laid out the final strategy, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. I saw a woman sitting with a straight back, her hands folded on the table, listening to the language of war. I was not afraid. I was not confused. For the first time in my life, I felt like I fit inside my own skin. Perhaps this is who my mother had wanted me to become all along. The atmosphere in the azure crown on the morning of the meeting was electric. The usual hush of the lobby had been replaced by a low, vibrating hum of whispers. Ava had done her job perfectly. 10 minutes before the scheduled start time, she had used her administrative access to send a calendar invite for the strategic settlement discussion to the entire distribution list of department heads, disguising it as a mandatory all-hands update. She claimed it was a clerical error. But the damage was wonderful. I stood at the entrance of the Diamond Conference Room, a glass-walled aquarium that overlooked the infinity pool. Inside, 2 men were waiting. Victor Linden was older than in the photographs, his hair a shocking white, but his eyes were sharp and clear. lacking the cloudiness of age. Beside him sat Trent Calloway, the polished CEO who treated the world like his personal buffet. I took a breath and walked in, staring straight at the man who had spent 3 decades pretending my mother never existed. Victor stood up, smoothing his Italian suit. Mrs. Merrick, thank you for joining us. We intended this to be a private conversation. There is no such thing as privacy in a hotel. Mr. Linden, I said, pulling out a chair. Before he could respond, the doors behind me opened. A procession of people walked in. It was not the press, but something far more dangerous to Victor's conscience. It was the old guard. The head of housekeeping who had been here for 30 years, the executive chef with the scarred hands, and the elderly concierge who walked with a cane. They did not say a word. They simply lined up along the back wall of the room, their arms crossed, bearing witness. Victor's jaw tightened, but he forced a benevolent smile. He slid a thick, creamy envelope across the mahogany table toward me. Let us cut to the chase. Judith? Victor said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. We acknowledge that there may have been some clerical oversights regarding your mother's departure from the company. To avoid a messy public spectacle that would hurt the brand, we are prepared to offer you a settlement. There is a check in there for $2 million. In exchange, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement and a waiver of all future claims. Trent leaned back, looking at me with amusement. It is a lot of money for a retiree from Oklahoma. You could buy a very nice condo. Maybe even get your son a better suit. I did not touch the envelope. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of the email Trent had sent to the board. I do not want your money, I said clearly. I placed the paper on the table and read the highlighted sentence aloud. The seed funding is secured from the stupid Harrow card. She is a legacy asset with zero financial literacy. The room went dead silent. I placed the bank transfer records next to the email. And here is the transfer of my life savings into a shell company controlled by you and my son. Trent's smirk vanished. That is privileged communication. Not anymore, a voice said from the back of the room. Ethan stepped forward. He looked terrified, his hands trembling by his sides, but he did not stop walking until he stood next to me. Who let him in here? Trent snapped. I invited myself, Ethan said, his voice shaking. I was the one who executed the transfers. Trent. I did exactly what you told me to do. He pulled out his phone and pressed play. The audio was grainy, but Trent's voice was unmistakable. We wash the liquidity through the E&T account. These old women are the easiest marks. We clean the money with their blood, and they thank us for the opportunity. Victor slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He turned to Trent, his face a mask of shock. You authorized this, Trent. I had no idea you were running off-book schemes. This is embezzlement. It was a masterful performance. Victor was cutting the limb to save the body. He was throwing Trent to the wolves right in front of us. Do not insult my intelligence, Victor, Marcus said, stepping forward from the shadows near the door. He tossed a yellow document onto the table. This is a memo from 1993. It outlines the strategy to dilute Margaret Harrow's shares and erase her name from the corporate history. It is signed by you. This culture of theft did not start with Trent. It started with you. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Then, the old concierge spoke up from the back of the room. Mrs. Harrow paid for my wife's heart surgery when the company insurance denied it, the old man said, his voice raspy. When Mr. Linden took over, the first thing he did was cut the health benefits. He said the staff were expendable overhead. She was a good woman, the chef added. She knew the name of every person in my kitchen. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a corporate negotiation to a tribunal. Victor looked at the faces of the people he had ignored for decades and saw real hatred. "This is illegal," Victor hissed, losing his composure. "You stole private corporate files. I will have you all arrested for trespassing and industrial espionage. I will sue you into the ground." "Actually," Marcus said, checking his watch, "you won't." He held up his phone. "Because the state prosecutor just confirmed receipt of our complaint. And since the files were obtained under a court preservation order, they are fully admissible. Oh, and one more thing. Ethan here has agreed to be a cooperating witness for the state." Victor and Trent both froze as their phones began to buzz simultaneously. It was their legal teams. The news was out. I looked at Victor Linden. He was no longer the titan of industry. He was just an old man who had run out of lies. "You have two choices," I said, my voice steady. "You can let the prosecutor drag you out of here in handcuffs in front of the 6 o'clock news, or we can sit down and write a new agreement. Right now." Victor Linden did not panic. Instead, he adjusted his silk tie and leaned forward, clasping his hands on the mahogany table like a benevolent grandfather preparing to give a lecture. "Let us be reasonable. Mrs. Merrick," Victor said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "We can make this go away. I am prepared to offer a settlement of $5 million, tax-free. Additionally, we will reinstate Ethan. We will frame his actions as a misguided training exercise. He keeps his career. You get a comfortable retirement. And Margaret's file remains where it belongs, buried." It was a tempting offer. It was more money than I could earn in 10 lifetimes at the trucking company. A week ago, I would have signed the paper with shaking hands. But today, the silence in the room felt heavy with the ghosts of the people standing behind me. "Ava," I said, not looking at Victor. "Step forward. Please." Ava hesitated, then walked to the edge of the table. She looked small next to the corporate sharks, but her chin was high. "Who is this?" Trent sneered. "The receptionist." "This is the granddaughter of the man who died in your service elevator," I said. "She is the living proof of what happens when you erase history. You didn't just steal shares, Mr. Linden. You stole safety. You stole dignity." I looked Victor in the eye. "I do not want your hush money. I want a seat at the table." Marcus slid a new document across the table. "Our terms are non-negotiable. Judith Merrick is to be recognized as the legitimate heir to Margaret Harrow's original stake. That makes her a majority shareholder in the Azure Crown entity. Furthermore, the corporation will sign a binding agreement to overhaul the human resources policy and establish a retroactive compensation fund for injured employees, starting with the Collins family." "That is insanity." Trent slammed his hand on the table. "You are talking about setting a precedent that will bankrupt us. Every disgruntled employee from the last 30 years will come out of the woodwork." Victor remained silent, calculating. He knew that a lawsuit would drag on for years. He was 72 years old. He did not have years to spend in depositions. "If we go to court," Victor said slowly, "the burden of proof is on you. We have the official records. You have photocopies and memories. The law favors the one who holds the pen, Mrs. Merrick. And if the pen is poisoned, Ethan spoke up. He stepped closer to the table. If you refuse, Victor, I will release the second batch of emails. The ones that show how Horizon Crest has been using shell companies in Panama to evade corporate taxes for the last 15 years. The penalties for that will not just be money. It will be federal prison. Victor's face went pale. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. Son? You would be implicating yourself. I am already down, Victor, Ethan said, his voice trembling but firm. I don't care anymore. If I go down, I am taking the whole ship with me. Victor looked at Ethan, then at me. He was searching for a crack, a sign of weakness he could exploit. You have lost your home, Judith, Victor said softly. You are destitute. Can you really afford to gamble with this offer if you lose in court? You walk away with nothing. I leaned forward. The fear that had ruled my life for 56 years was gone, burned away by the fire of the last 3 days. That is exactly why you are going to lose, Victor, I said. I have already lost my house. I have lost my savings. I have lost my blind faith in my son. I have absolutely nothing left to lose. But you have an empire to lose. You have a reputation. You have your freedom. Suddenly, the phone in the center of the table buzzed. It was the General Counsel for Horizon Crest. Victor hit the speaker button. Sir, we have a problem. The lawyer's voice was frantic. The Miami Herald just called for a comment. They have copies of the Harrow Incorporation papers and the unsigned will. They are asking about the erasure of the female co-founder. They are running the story online in 20 minutes. Victor stared at the phone. The color drained from his face completely. The threat of scandal was no longer hypothetical. It was knocking at the door. He looked at me with a mixture of loathing and resignation. Fine, Victor rasped. We will recognize you internally. You will get your shares. But the admission of guilt? The apology. It stays sealed. We cannot admit to fraud publicly. No, I said, shaking my head. The agreement must be written. It must be public. And it will be read to the staff of the Azure Crown before we file it with the court. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Ava reached under the table and squeezed my hand hard. Her palm was sweating. I looked at Ethan. He was looking at me with wide eyes, a look I had never seen before. It was not love, and it was not need. It was respect. Victor turned his chair toward the window. He looked out at the ocean, at the empire he had built on a foundation of lies. He looked like a man who realized that the tide had finally come in. She was just like you, Victor muttered, almost to himself. Margaret. She never knew when to quit either. He turned back to face me, his shoulders slumping. Okay, Mrs. Merrick, he said, picking up a pen. We do it your way. 1 week later, the grand lobby of the Azure Crown was packed with every employee from the valet drivers to the housekeeping staff. There were no news cameras. But the rumour mill had done its work better than any press release. The air was thick with the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Everyone was waiting for the axe to fall. Victor Linden stepped up to the microphone stand near the fountain. He looked smaller than he had in the boardroom, his voice raspy as it echoed off the marble walls. Good morning, Victor said, clearing his throat. I stand here today to correct a history that has been incomplete for too long, effective immediately. The corporation formally recognizes Margaret Harrow as the co-founder of this institution. Furthermore, we recognize Mrs. Judith Merrick as the legitimate heir to the Harrow shares and a primary shareholder in this property. Additionally, Mr. Trent Calloway has stepped down as CEO due to personal reasons. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Victor stepped back, and I walked forward. I held the old black and white photograph of my mother standing in front of the architectural model. My hands were steady. I looked out at the sea of uniforms, seeing faces that looked tired, faces that looked worried, faces that reminded me of my own reflection in the mirror for the last 40 years. My mother disappeared from this history because she was inconvenient, I said into the microphone. I spent my life angry at her for leaving, but I realized this week that she did not leave. She was pushed. I am not here to take revenge on an old man. I am here to ensure that what my mother built is not used to trample on people anymore. I took a breath and looked at Ava, who was standing in the front row. As my first act as a shareholder, I announced, we are establishing a retroactive compensation fund for all employees injured on the job in the last 30 years, starting with the family of Arthur Collins, and we are overhauling the wage structure effective immediately. The room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of relief and disbelief. Ava covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Later, in the small office that had been hastily cleared for me, I signed the paperwork promoting Ava to the Assistant Manager of Human Resources, specifically in charge of the Harrow Legacy Project. She hugged me tight, burying her face in my shoulder. Thank you, Mother Harrow, she whispered. It was a new name. It felt heavy, but it felt right. When the excitement died down, I found Ethan standing in the corner of the room. He was wearing a plain white shirt and black trousers, the uniform of a busboy. He did not look at me at first. I signed the plea deal. Mum, he said, his voice quiet. Probation. I am barred from holding any financial license for 10 years. The prosecutor said your cooperation saved me from 5 years in federal prison. You saved yourself by telling the truth. Ethan, I said. He looked up, and I saw the shame burning in his eyes. It was real this time. I asked the manager if I could work here, in the kitchen, or the laundry. Anywhere. I want to pay you back. Every cent. I looked at my son. I did not hug him. I did not tell him it was all forgotten. That part of me was gone. You will have to learn from the beginning, I said sternly. Not just how to scrub a floor, but how to live a decent life. You start tomorrow at 6 in the morning. Yes, ma'am, he said. Thank you, Mom. That night, I stood alone on the balcony of the penthouse suite, the neon sign of the azure crown reflected in the glass door, casting a blue glow over the room. Below me, the city of Miami was a grid of light and noise. I looked out at the dark ocean and whispered into the wind. We did it, Mum, I said softly. My phone rang. It was Marcus. The court approved the settlement. Judith, he said. The wire transfer is initiating tomorrow. Your principal is returned, plus the damages. You are a wealthy woman. I smiled, but my heart did not race. The numbers were just tools now, not a lifeline. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. I hung up and walked back into the room. I had checked out of the staff quarters an hour ago. For the first time, I was standing in a room at the Azure Crown, listed under my own name. with the designation Priority Shareholder next to it. I sat on the edge of the massive bed and took off my shoes. My feet ached, but it was a good ache. I let out a long breath, filling my lungs with the cool, conditioned air. It was not the breath of a victim who had just survived a disaster. It was the breath of a woman who had finally stood up, who had defined her own worth not by her son's love or a bank balance, but by the dignity that no one, not even her own blood, could ever steal from her again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below to connect with our community. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and give us a hype so this story can reach even more people who might need to hear it.